What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 722. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from his vintage cube lair in Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, you popped your head up from your from the mines just long enough to do a show with us.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been hard at work here, and it's been great. I mean, I'm getting to play vintage cube all the time is just kind of a dream.
And I mean, can you imagine? Like, what the hell, man? You literally somehow finagled yourself into a position where your job is to do money drafts of vintage cube all day. Like, what? How did you do that? Like, I feel like you should be, standing in front of a group of students being like, here's how to achieve your dreams, kids.
Didn't you just do that and they kind of no-sold you?
I did. I actually did. Yeah. And that did happen.
But I think it's a combination. Look, this is what I would say almost anyone who is in a successful position really should be able to kind of understand. And especially when you're trying to talk to other people, it's always a combination, and the proportions can be different, of the right time, the right place, luck, effort, skill. All of those things go together. Like, I mean, take Limited Resources. You and Ryan started at the right time. Yeah, there was no competition. You were like, maybe, I don't know if I don't want to say literally the first Magic podcast, because I mean, who knows? But it were basically one of, if not the first, among the first. And you made something that people liked, and you were good at it. So that's the skill part. And you showed up every week. You're at the right place, right time, and with the right consistency. And there's all those things go together. A lot of people who are successful in any sort of like media capacity, or even a company that's just making things, they were successful in part because they started before other people. They got first or early mover advantage, and they did a good job. It's not like it's not that you need all of these things in the exact proportions, but you do need a combination of those things. And you won't always see the right ones. But if you have everything and you get lucky, then that's a pretty hard way to stop to stop yourself from losing.
I don't know, if you watch your videos, you wouldn't think you're a very lucky person, but because you always draw too many lands. No, yeah. Nothing. Okay. Well, anyway, if you guys want to check out Luis's videos, Vintage Cube or otherwise, it's LSV. It's his channel on YouTube, and you can find the link actually on front page of LRcast or on his Twitter or wherever. And I highly recommend checking that out. Now I can't wait for the Vintage Cube to come back again, even though they just took it down. This week on the show, we're going to be talking about Wilds of Eldraine, and specifically, we're going to be saying goodbye to it as the sunset show because we've got kind of another set coming out for the year shortly here, and that means that it's time to say goodbye and maybe good riddance to Wilds of Eldraine. We're going to go over it here, the ups and the significant downs as well. Before we do, we wanted to say thank you to everybody who is on our Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. You get a thank you card and an LR sticker in the mail, no matter what level you sign up for. And we really appreciate each and every person who supports us over there. One other thing you get is access to the Patreon feed, which includes things like the Patreon question of the week. This one comes from Daniel, who asks a simple question. What is your fondest MTG memory? Is it winning the PT, or is it something with friends, or what is it?
I mean, there's a lot. It kind of depends on like what mood I'm in at the time, or what I'm trying to like. What is the thing I'm proudest of? Probably just getting into the Hall of Fame. That's just like my overall proudest achievement. Winning the Pro Tour is not far behind. Fondest memory, honestly, it's pretty close. Like, I think that the birthday dinner I had in Philadelphia when you and Paul made that cake for me that had the Giantar on it, and
Giantar on it, yeah, that was sweet.
And that was kind of it wasn't that was so much better than all the other things, but it was kind of a culmination of those. And my whole team was at the dinner, and these are folks I had known for, in some cases, like almost 20 years, and it just showed me how many good memories I have in total with all of the people at Magic tournaments, especially now that we're in an era where we don't get to go to as many. So it made it even more special. Yeah.
And that kind of felt like, one last ride of the Giantar, right? It was a way to kind of look back and say, this is special. This group of people, this thing, even though it kind of felt like it was starting to dissipate a little bit, you know.
For sure.
Which it has, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, not disappeared, but, you know, a good example would be like Paulo was at that dinner. Well, I haven't seen him since then.
Yeah. He just wasn't queued for the next PT and did skip one he was queued for because he had a vacation. It was just, there's a lot of things that that take precedence now.
Right. Real life. So anyway, yeah, that's definitely on the list. For me, I mean, there's many of them. One of the ones that definitely comes to mind, at least from a booth perspective, was when Paul and I called the Yami.
Yam Wing Chun's punt. That thing was That still is one of my gripes when it comes to kind of how the Magic community can respond to things. Andy Cooper, our editor of Channel Fireball at the time, made this awesome video explaining the whole punt, like for like an audience that's less invested. So it was like really not taking any assumptions in like, here's what happened. For those who don't know, Yan Wing Chun playing against Paulo Vitor Damarosa, top 4 PTM Enquete, had Hazoret in play, drew Incendiary Flow, got too excited, went to attack, had 2 cards in hand, couldn't attack with Hazoret, lost the match as a result, right?
Right. And had he played Incendiary Flow first, Maine would have won.
All you had to do is cast his card. Paulo was tapped out. Like this was the punt heard around the world. It was huge. I remember being in the hall watching it at the time, even though I was doing coverage for that event, but I wasn't on that match. I think it was why, actually. It was Cheon and Riley. It's because it was the semis and we do the finals.
But it was me and Cheon in the booth. I mean,
it was?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe.
This is why it's one of my fondest memories.
Sure. I believe you. But anyways, we put this video up and it's in no way making fun of Yang Wing Chun. It's just not. It's just acknowledging, yes, he made a mistake. It was clearly a mistake. It wasn't close to not being a mistake, you know? Yeah. And I think that it's the sort of thing that.
Did people bash it or something?
Everyone was so mad about it. They're like, how could you do this? This is so insensitive. And it's just like, what are you talking about? These are the equivalent of professional athletes.
Right.
You think of when a football player, fumbles a catch or a quarterback throws an interception, it isn't run on ESPN 50,000 times with all the talking heads actually being really mean about it.
Right. Like, exactly.
Like I remember, I don't remember the name of the player, but there was a football player who had a historically bad game. And there was like someone made a low light reel earlier this season, and this was like, horrible for him. Like, I'm not saying all that stuff is actually like great, but this was so far from that. This was just like, hey, this professional Magic player made a just straight up mistake. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And it was huge, and it was at really high stakes. This is interesting. People like to see this stuff, and the feedback was so bad we took it down, which, I mean, I guess if the community doesn't want it, yeah, that's fine. We don't put it up. But I was disappointed in the community. I thought that if I made that mistake, I wouldn't want that video not to exist. Like that's an acknowledgement of you screwing up, and that's fine.
It's part of the story of that PT. And I mean,
I wouldn't play Magic if people didn't screw up against me, and I've made plenty of mistakes myself.
Yeah. And to be clear, like I'm a big Yami fan. Like, I play basketball with him. I talk to him. I talk hoops with him, during that era, whenever I saw him. He's also
the best at taking it.
He was so awesome about it. Yeah.
I mean, he also plays poker and does all.
He knows how to take it.
He understands how these things work. And it is just, you take your lumps, you learn from it, you move on, you acknowledge that you made the thing. And it's just like, this wasn't a mockery of him. And it's just it just showed me that there's a lot of maturing to do for this audience. Like it was a very kind of knee-jerk sensitive response that I didn't think reflected too well on the Magic audience as a whole. Yeah.
I mean, for me, it was just such a, when you're in the booth, you're just trying to do the moment's justice. Right. And that requires, foreseeing them on some level. Right. And this is where Paul really crushed it, because you have to realize that when you're in the booth and you don't get too many moments to yell and freak out. But we knew that this top deck, right, there was Incendiary Flow off the top. I think there was maybe one other card, another Audi had as well, if I remember correctly. And Paul was all over it. He's like, he needs to find this or this, and it was like, blah, blah, blah. And then he drew it and we're like, oh, we got the Incendiary Flow, and right then, you jump out of your chair. And to me, in the booth, as a commentator, you've already stuck the landing. You saw it coming, think of the lightning helix moment, Randy was setting that up. Okay, he needs to find it. Oh, he found it, that kind of thing. But then to have the presence of mind, and I give Paul credit for this, to recognize, even though our emotions are up, we're having our moment in the booth, that we're freaking out, and also like we think that Yami just top decked the game, to recognize Paul's like, no. Like he knew right away, like, don't go to combat. Like, you know, because we could have been a second behind that call, you know, where we're like, wait, what happened? Oh no, did he go to, you know, but that wasn't it. We were like actually ahead of it. And it was because of Paul. And I was able to pick up on, you know, what he was saying and ride with it too. And yeah, that was one of my favorite memories for sure in the booth. Just a wild call too. Also, it was funny because if you watch it, you can see how Paulo reacts, and he's so cool. He's just like, "Oh, okay," you know, like,
yeah, I guess he's like, professional.
Yeah, he's like, "I'll take it," you know.
Yeah, I mean, you take those, like, yeah. you know you've lost, and then all of a sudden you haven't. That's just awesome. And so, yeah. I guess the thing that bothered me is like, why are we pretending Magic players, especially professional ones, don't make mistakes, or maybe even professional ones? Like, right. Every single Magic player who's ever played in a tournament, I don't care if you're John Finkel, the best player of all time, you made some mistakes that tournament. Right. They're not always this big, this high stakes, this on camera, all those things together. But like that, it's a cool moment of Magic history that I think could have made it could have interested a lot more people in professional Magic, honestly, in watching it. Like these are the kind of things that make this like, oh, this is an exciting moment. Maybe I want to see more of this.
This is how we define exciting moments. Like, right.
For a lot of people complain, and I'm not saying these are all the same people, you know, obviously there's just a big audience, but a lot of people complain that Magic tournaments don't have enough drama and that players aren't evocative enough and you know, there's not like enough excitement. And it's just like kind of like two stone-faced players playing cards. Like, well, this is an exciting moment. Like, why can't we showcase this?
Yeah, and you should. And I mean, it all comes down to the tone of the piece, right? I mean, yeah, if you're just throwing mud at him, well, okay, that's kind of crappy. But if it's like an interesting breakdown of a high leverage moment, then that's actually pretty cool. Thanks for the question, Daniel. That was a good one. And we've got, of course, a lot more memories. Maybe we'll revisit that at some point. Luis, let's do one more crack a pack from Wilds of Eldraine before we get into the categories. Our first card out is Scarecrow Guide. This is the 2-mana 2/1 with reach, and you can filter mana through it for different colors. Didn't really end up hitting.
No, it was okay. Like you could play it. It wasn't embarrassing. This wasn't like the Shire Scarecrow, right, from Lord of the Rings, which had a lot of the same abilities. This was a little bit more playable, but it still wasn't a card you were like stoked to have in your deck.
No, Harried Spear Guard, the red 1/1 haster, and when it dies, you get a rat.
Oh man, I never beat this card.
yeah. This is not what you wanted to see on the other side on turn 1 for sure.
No, it was really good. Just a very strong card.
And you could lean into these too, where you know you could draft as many as you could get and try to push your curve down as low as possible. Card that will show up in one of our categories shortly is Rat Out, which performed very well in the format.
Yeah, I think that I would probably start with Harried Spearguard over Rat Out because I feel like it's just better to be a little bit more proactive, and it leaves you outs to both red-white and red-black, which, I mean, Rat Out also leaves you outs to black-green, but I don't think it's as good in black-green as Harried Spearguard is in either of the other two archetypes.
Sure. What about Edgewall Pack, the 4-mana 3/3 menace, and he gives you a rat as well? Do you have that over Spearguard? I mean, it was a strong card.
No, I think I would Spearguard. I just think the lower part of the curve is always more important in aggro deck, and you're like, if you have to play Grabby Giant over Edgewall Pack, it's fine. But you're having a hard time replacing a Spearguard, yeah. Right. You don't get extra Spearguards or whatever.
Right. How about the Horrible Middle with Merry Bards?
No, this is the worst of all worlds.
This is a fan favorite, Minstrosity. Great name, great art, and actually a good card as it turned out too.
I mean, I got to give credit. One of my favorite, like, kind of small aspects of the set is I thought all the suites were really funny names and evocative images, and they were good wordplay. Like, they actually really nailed that.
Yeah, I mean, here's the flavor text on Minstrosity. It says, "If the sugary abomination of Sweet Tooth Village were ever under someone's control, that time is long past." I mean, it's just a rampaging candy monster. Next is Bestial Bloodline. Didn't end up really hitting.
Not really a playable card.
Next card did, though. Hopeful Vigil. This one was nice. Like, best white common, nice.
Yeah, Hopeful Vigil is very good.
I would take it here over these cards.
You like it over the rest?
I do.
I think I'd Spearguard just because I'd rather start red than white. But
I would rather start red than white as well, but I think
it's close.
Vigil's like, yeah. Last common is Aquatic Alchemist. This is the weird elemental. It's the 1 and a blue 1/3. And if you cast instants and sorceries, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. And then what was the bubble up? I can't remember. Sorcery, put target instant or
you get a on top card of your
back
deck.
On top of your library. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think this card was pretty mediocre. Like I think that there were some decks that could use it, but that was more speaking to how bad blue was than how good this card was.
Right. I'm adding this to a long list of failed build arounds for the set. We'll get to that in a little bit. Oh, and speaking of, here's another failed build around. Ashiok's Reaper. The 3 and a black 3/3. Whenever an enchantment you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card.
Extremely didn't work.
It just didn't work. It should have. I mean, they even set us up with the rolls and stuff, and it just, which sort of occasionally automatically go to the yard and nothing. Card I really like on paper. Maybe I should put this on the list of card that I read and it still looks good, but it just stinks. It's Tempest Heart. That's the 3 and a green 3/4 with trample. And whenever you cast a 5-drop or more, it gets a +1/+1 counter. And then it has 1 and a blue instant, draw 2, then discard 2. I mean, this card, there's not a lot to not like about this card. It's like 4-drop, curve into a 5. It's a 4/5 trampler. If you do scan the clouds at some point, then great. But man, this thing should be good, and it just stunk.
Yeah, it just really didn't work. I think it's mostly because that theme didn't work more than anything else.
The 5-drop theme?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that is kind of a bit more that speaking to that, but yeah, it's disappointing. This card looked pretty cool. Like adventure cards are cool in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I like adventure cards as well. Next card up is Tough Cookie.
Oh yeah. Green had like a murderer's row of uncommons, like Gingerbread Hunter, Tough Cookie, Welcome to Sweet Tooth, and it's like,
and the fight thing too, Imidane's whatever.
Oh yeah, and Agatha's Champion.
Champion, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you basically had like 3 extremely good or 4 extremely good uncommons, and this is one of them. So I would take Tough Cookie over any common.
Yeah, same. And this was not literally the best uncommon, but it's like top 3. So there you go.
I guess it's a 2-mana 2/2 plus a food, but it's really like a 2-mana plus a 4/4 in a lot of ways. And you could also, as some people have learned, unfortunately, sack itself to gain some life. So that is something that actually does come up.
It does. I've also had that come up with cards that want to resolve because they do more than just kill the thing, and all of a sudden it's gone and you don't get the extra stuff. Tough Cookie's nasty. We have 2 rares. One of them is from the bonus sheet. It is As Foretold. That's the 2 and a blue enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep. You put a time counter on it, and once each turn you can pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for a spell you cost that has mana value X, where X is the number of counters on it. So it grows, and then if the stars align perfectly and you have that much mana cost thing, you can pay it for free with As Foretold. Basically, it was just stone unplayable. I never even saw it on the battlefield once. Like nobody was even ambitious and just thought this might be something interesting. Like I just didn't see play. Our regular rare is Hilda's Crown of Winter. That's
there we go.
3-mana legendary artifact. You can pay 1 and tap it to tap a creature, and it is free on your turn. And you can pay 3 and sacrifice the crown to draw a card for each tapped creature your opponent controls. This is better than Tough Cookie, right?
Yeah,
colorless
by a lot. Awesome. Not only is it just straight up better, it's also a colorless card.
Yeah.
So like you're just you're incurring 0 risk by taking it, and it's just like this card was just a huge bomb. I mean, Icy Manipulator is such a pain to play against, and this is an Icy Manipulator that also randomly lets you sack it to draw a bunch of cards.
Yeah. No, it's great. I would take it for sure. I guess what I would say is if we have to draft Wilds of Eldraine one more time, then at least we got a really good rare. A little foreshadowing there for you, Luis. Let's get into it. Sunset Show. If you could summarize the set in one sentence, what would it be?
Honestly, I kind of ran into a little bit of trouble figuring that out because the set didn't really jive with me at all. I can't fully
Then come up
explain
with
why.
a sentence that says that it didn't jive with you. I want to hear you. What do you think?
All right, where did blue go? Was a sentence I wrote down.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I mean, for me, there were some decent ideas here, but way too many misses, and it made the format too boring. This is like the least resonant, and I don't just mean flavor, like some of the cookies and all that stuff was really cool. But dude, in 3.5 months, ask me a question about Wilds of Eldraine, and I'll be like, I don't remember anything about that set. Like, I'll be like that. I don't remember the mechanics. I don't remember a deck that I liked. I don't remember what colors were good. I might remember like a random tough cookie or monstrosity because it was funny. That's not good. Yeah. That's not where you want to be. You know, normally when you say, hey, remember this? Oh, which set was that? Oh, that was the one with Morph. Oh, yeah, that was cool. I remember that. You know, and then it sparks my memory and I'll remember the cards in a set. But I don't think that's going to happen here. What were the best archetypes?
The Jund ones. All the Jund colors were great. Like, red, black, black, green, red, green. Red, green's less than the others, just partially because black was really strong. And the red, green's kind of like strength in a lot of cases is big stuff, and the big stuff themes weren't good. But red, green was still good. I mean, it was good. And then red, white was like the only white archetype that was really good. Like, sometimes you could draft black, white. And there were some like devoted blue, white drafters. And I actually did like drafting blue, but this set also kind of ends up in a spot for me, at least, where it's like, I didn't play a premier level event with this. I played the 100K sealed in Vegas, which I did practice for, but I never got to draft it. I didn't make day 2. I didn't draft at Worlds. And as a result, I never really, I feel like I fully put to the test exactly how good blue was when playing with other like elite level players. Like, I won an RCQ drafting 5-color blue. I drafted a good amount on Arena and some on Magic Online, and it was fine. But it's kind of like, I feel like I really understood March of the Machines well, and then I went to the Pro Tour and I played it, and and that's the case for most sets. Like, I'm not saying those 2 drafts sum up my entirety of knowledge, and if I don't do those drafts, I don't understand the format or I can't really prove it. But I also wasn't like testing for the PT like the Worlds folks on my team. I didn't go to the house and do some drafts, because for normal Pro Tours, I'll show up at least a couple days early and do some house drafts. And that's where, like, Lord of the Rings house drafts felt so different than drafting on Arena, and certainly on Arena and even on Magic Online. So I think that I don't have like the full confidence that blue would perform as well as it was performing for me in my drafts, as if I was playing against other players who had that much practice and that much on the line, which is not to say that the competition is terrible on Arena or Magic Online or anything like that. But you don't really fully get put to the test until you do that.
What cards were we most wrong about on the set reviews, or cards that maybe surprised us one way or the other?
I mean, there's a big category, and this I don't fault us for at all. The blue-white tap theme didn't work.
Right.
And that meant that the cards that we said, yeah, these look good, they just weren't. And that's the sort of thing that in a set review you're not really going to find out, just because I think for the most part, those cards did look good and were good if their theme worked, which we have to assume the theme is going to at least be reasonable. It was like way less than reasonable.
Right. And that's kind of that's what usually it comes down to, is that if we miss, it's usually not on an individual card basis that we just like somehow didn't see that a card could be really powerful. It was more that like we have to make a certain base level assumption that like, hey, if they're going to put this blue-white tapping thing as a full kind of main mechanic for a color pair, into the set, that we assume that it's supported enough to at least kind of bring it somewhere in the middle, like Luis said. And if that were the case, then I think those cards, would have been okay, but it really wasn't. Another one that fits that same description is Bargain, which is that for many of the cards that we talked about, we said, well, if you can bargain regularly, then X, right? And there was a lot of cards that were like bargain fodder, or, that would support bargaining. And as it turned out, it was the opposite of the tapping thing. Bargain was kind of everywhere, and it didn't feel that hard. Like the set sort of naturally, like you could augment it a little bit, but even naturally there would be a rat token or an enchantment sitting around that you didn't need. And Bargain ended up overperforming. So the things that had Bargain couple of examples. Hamlet Glutton, we both liked it quite a bit. But if you told me, I would have guessed that it would be something like 50-50 on whether you cast it for 5 mana versus 7. And it felt, I don't know the number, but it felt like it was 80-20 that you cast it for 5. Like when I drafted, I just put it in my 5-drop slot.
Yeah. And part of that 20% where you cast it for 7 wasn't because you couldn't bargain. It's because you didn't need to.
It's because you didn't need to. You're like, I got the 7 mana anyway.
I think if I were to go back and look at those cards like for the first time again, I would evaluate every bargain card as if you could bargain for free. Like
exactly. So every card with bargains higher and every enabler is better.
Yeah. Another card which we surely missed on was Princess Takes Flight, and to a lesser degree, The Apprentice's Folly, which were these two sagas that were weak, except the joke was if you bargained them away, they were very good.
Yes.
And certainly those were better. Some of us missed on Hopeless Nightmare, but others didn't.
But those were good too. Hopeless Nightmare and Hopeful Vigil. We both talked pretty extensively, especially about Hopeless Nightmare, about the upside of it. But it didn't feel like you and I had an argument on the set review about how many do you want? And I pushed back on you because you said you would run 2 or 3 or whatever. And I said, yeah, if bargaining's good, then that works. But like, if you're not able to bargain them away, they're kind of subpar, right? Like you're getting a card out of their hand and then you're paying a bunch of mana to scry to, which, in current era limited formats is not a good use of your mana. But as it turned out, Hopeless Nightmare ended up being actually better than either of us gave it a grade for. And that was because bargain was everywhere. And it was one of the things that you could do to really kind of turbocharge your bargain deck.
Yeah. I think that overall, like the way those cards looked was like the not only just the bargain cards, but also the cards like those sagas that you had to sacrifice to bargain. It's all kind of mixed into the fact that bargain was just a very well supported mechanic. Like
almost
bargain got there. Actually, probably too much given how many of the mechanics failed in the set, but we'll kind of get to that when we talk about the mechanics as a whole.
Literally, the mechanic is called bargain. Like you're supposed to have to give up more, and it just never feels like you did. It's just like you get to max out.
Bargaining with fairies famously goes really well for you and is very easy to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and and it is interesting because when you change the paradigm just a little bit, then it completely changes, or maybe not completely, but it certainly influences. Princess Takes Flight is a perfect example where we evaluated it somewhat in a vacuum. But if I told you, you will be able to bargain it away almost at will, and this format's very, very fast. Like you would have said, oh, then I'm going to bump up Princess Takes Flight like at least a full letter grade. Like it's so much better than if you just play it and let the chapters run themselves out in like a normal mid-range format, for example. And so, that's what we're always trying to get our head around on the set review is hedging one way or the other, that if this stuff is supported, then this is going to be really good, that type of thing. What were some of the underrated cards? We got Rat Out in our Crack-A-Pack there. And this happens sometimes with formats where like, is one toughness an inflection point that actually matters? And in this case, yeah, absolutely. Rat Out and Flick a Coin both overperformed relative to how they would in like, quote, the average set.
I mean, if you look at some of the list that we had of cards that we underrated, Rat Out, Monstrosity, Flick a Coin, Brave the Wilds, these are all little trinkety effects, or in the case of Brave the Wilds, both a trinkety effect and a card that made use of trinkety effects. This was an aspect of the set I liked. I like this about Brothers War too. I like sets that like give you a bunch of little baubles to like throw into play and then make use of later. I find that fun. That's a fun part of Magic for me.
I agree.
I think those games are cool. So we were just a little lower on those than I think we should have been. And then Spell Stutter ended up overperforming, which is kind of funny because I didn't go back and listen to what we said about it exactly, but we had to have talked about Make Disappear and how that was pretty good. So I don't think we could have gotten Spell Stutter that wrong, did we?
I don't think so. No, I just think I put it as an underrated
put it on the list.
card.
Were you trying to throw shade on our past abilities when we were clearly doing a very good job? I put it on the list of
underrated cards, not cards that we were wrong about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just, the format came out and it was very apparent that it was fast. And I think that people tend to jump off of any type of counter spells or reactive stuff that doesn't affect the board pretty quickly. But it turned out that the blue deck could actually take advantage of, and in fact needed an effect like Spell Stutter to stop your 2-drop. So I just think it was a little bit underrated at the beginning of the format. Not that it's so amazing, but what were some of the controversial cards?
Honestly, the blue cards kind of were like,
yeah.
And this is one of the things that I actually found kind of funny when I went to Worlds, because it was at the same place as the 100K. Talking to my team and talking to the other people from other teams who were playing at Worlds, it was like some of them really liked blue and thought blue was actually actively draftable. There's a bunch of blue-white decks that got trophies in Worlds, and I remember talking to Terabad, Carl Serap, who really liked that format too, or like blue-white too. Some people thought blue was good, and a lot of people thought it was bad. And the numbers, this is one of the points where the numbers on 17 lands really showed blue underperforming. So it was interesting to see kind of where it actually landed.
Yeah, it was a good magnifying glass into a color pair. If you took it at face value in the example of blue-white, and you're just like, I'm going to draft blue-white how Wizards is telling me to. I'm going to use the Signpost Uncommon as my guide. That means that tapping down my opponent's creatures is what matters. And I'm going to take stuff that cares about and or taps down my opponent's stuff. Then you would have failed miserably. But if you took a more traditional blue-white mid-range control deck, call it, something that plays to the board, isn't just this like pure long game control. It actually, does play to the board, but it takes advantage of some cards that nobody else really wanted, like Kellen's Lightblades and like Spell Stutter. And those were enough interaction that you could actually stabilize a board. And then you would have cards like Into the Fey Court and stuff like that could get you ahead on cards in the later game. But that was not what was pitched to us by the Signpost Uncommons or the Build-Arounds. This was a much different archetype. So you had to drill in. And those are the types of cards that people like Carl were, winning with. More so than, Bitter Chills or, Freezing whatever's,
Bitter Chill was actually a really big part of both decks, but it's more like Succumb to the Cold is
I was literally trying to like AI a name for one of those cards, and I came up with a real one on accident, but
yeah. That's fair. That's fair.
But yeah, the blue cards definitely were controversial, and the blue-white deck was what we talked about a lot. What card had your favorite artwork?
Gingerbread Hunter, because I love that he's like picking his teeth with the sword of one of the like gingerbread fighters.
Really great.
And Gingerbread Hunter is just kind of a cool name. Is illustrated by Milivoj Saran.
Okay, great job.
My stab at that.
Yeah, and it that image really stood out. Like I can still picture that in my head.
It's evocative. I think that's cool.
Yeah, I think so too. Mine, I think the art I liked the best was Tempest Heart. It was like a sweet Elmer take.
Come on.
I'm serious.
You're just like, oh, it's got an elk in it. I love it.
Dude, there was like 3 choices and I took one of them. It's from Aldo Dominguez. But this one's like particularly really good. Like it's got this like electric feel to it. Aldo did not skimp. He was like, I just got like an elk here. This one was like really well done. Plus, what's wrong with liking Elmer the Elk? This next section pains me greatly.
So tilting, man.
So this is a non-exhaustive list, but what were the best build-around cards in this set? And
this, by the way, this category is, I think, actually at the root of why neither of us really enjoyed the set that much.
Yes, I agree. Because I'm going to read a bunch for you, and you tell me. Ashiok's Reaper didn't really work. We talked about that in the Crack-A-Pack. Chancellor of Tales. That's the one that doubles up your adventure. Nope. Dream Spoilers. Okay, so it's like a fairies thing. I'm going to play some stuff on your turn. Nope, never even saw it triggered. Dutiful Griffin. Oh, I can take my enchantments and turn them back. Nope, nothing. Sir Armand. Okay, it was a good card on its own, but like it had other synergies. Nope. Up to Beanstalk? Probably our winner, right? Like, because it just gave you a card back right away.
Yeah, I mean,
and let you kind of free
the
roll.
floor on this was really high, but yes, I wouldn't say that it worked exactly.
Right. I mean, that's the sad part is like Up to Beanstalk's probably the winner, and its primary use case was cycle for 2, sack to bargain rather than like go off. Charade. That didn't work at all. I mean, again, the card on its own was actually pretty good, but it wanted you to be built around. And in fact, you were probably better off if you just played it on its own. Food Fight, Blue-Red Johan, Aquatic Alchemist.
Night of Sweet's Revenge. Like,
yes.
I mean, I know Cord was pretty into that card, but I think even he would say it was like a marginal thing that you could get to work sometimes, not a like, hey, let's take a build around and work towards it. The set was really low on build arounds that you would feel comfortable taking first pick and actively working towards it and feeling like you got rewarded. There were cards that had synergies that were good, like Greta, right, was good. The Sawtooth, the 3-mana 3/3 that makes a food and all that. But like Greta was good just because she was a good card, not really because you had to build your deck around her. Like all the rat stuff didn't work, but it's not like you're like, I'm going to first pick this like Totentons and like build this cool deck around it. It's like, no, I'm just going to play these cards and they're going to work out all right. Like
exactly. And so it's not a total loss because sometimes they go for a build around and it doesn't hit and then it just never even sees the battlefield, where with these rat cards, like you mentioned, you could play any of them. There were none that you were just like, I'm just never going to touch this card. But it's so much better as a format if some percentage of these actually work. And I think Up the Beanstalk's the only one that's an actual build, a pure build around that I would like be happy. Like Chancellor, Ashiok's Reaper, Dream Spoilers, Dutiful Griffin, all big misses. Yes, Sir Armand, and you mentioned Greta and Charade, those were cards you could put in your deck. Same thing with Totentons and stuff like that, but they weren't built around frequently. And then again, cards like Food Fight, Aquatic Alchemist, they just missed way, way, way too often. And I just feel like they left too much on the table. These were not supported build-arounds.
Yeah, to kind of play for the other side for a second, to advocate, I will say that the bargain cards, like Hatching Plans, for example, like bargain payoffs, those did work, and I don't think it's wrong to consider them build-arounds.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put Hatching Plans on here too.
Oh, don't worry. It shows up plenty in this show.
Yeah, and that was sweet. I mean, that part that gives you a taste of what it looks like to have a pure build-around or close enough to it that that actually works. But man, this is a big dent in the replayability, in the fun of experimenting during the draft and all of those type of things. If these don't work, and remember, a bunch of these are just like straight up uncommons that go right into a presumed color pair. They're not even, like Food Fight. Okay, fair enough. It's a little bit off the radar, that kind of thing. But, Dream Spoilers was supposed to be on the battlefield. Chancellor of Tales was supposed to be a card that you would pick regularly. Ashiok's Reaper, same thing. And it's just miss, and it's too many of those. And I think it really hurt the replayability of the format. To me, they felt abandoned. Like these felt like, we'll just throw a bunch of these things in here, see what sticks, but they weren't properly supported or they were too far out of whack. One thing that we should also mention, it'll come up later in the design part, but it does overshadow a lot of what we're talking about here, is the speed of the format. This was an extremely fast format. It was, in fact, the second fastest of the normal formats, the non-cube or whatever formats on Arena. Like, period. Yeah. The only one faster was ONE, and it was actually significantly faster. But still, this, we're talking about top 2 fastest formats. It is very difficult for cards like some of the ones that I mentioned, Food Fight and stuff like that, let alone even cards like Chancellor of Tales or Dream Spoilers, to function in an environment that's that hostile, right? Where like you don't get to take a turn off just kind of doing nothing. So something to have on the radar too, and we'll talk about it more. Which card still looks good when you read it, but just doesn't see play? Mine is Tempest Heart. And also mine is all of the cards in the build around category that every time I see them, I'm like, Dream Spoiler should work. Ashiok's Reaper should work. I don't know why they didn't.
I think that Ashiok's Reaper is the one that most stands out to me, because that one looked like the uncommon that draws a card for like one of the set's themes is pretty appealing. I think you look at that and you're like, yeah, this could really be good. And then it just was like really, really not good.
I would like, just in a vacuum, I would give, a vacuum of a set review, I would give that card like a B.
Yeah.
Because you only need to get one card off it before you're like significantly ahead. Like it's already like a body that you can play. It's 4-mana 3/3 or whatever.
So I want to touch on something. So when we look at the build arounds, and part of the reason that I think build arounds are so important to us specifically is We play a lot of every format. Like I just looked up my 17 lands data for this set, and I did about 20 drafts. But that's probably about a third to a quarter of the number of drafts I did, because I do a lot on my phone. I did a bunch on Magic Online, right? And my account wasn't linked for a while either. So I look at that and I'm like, okay, overall, I did, 60 to 80 drafts, let's say. That's still a lot of a format. And I don't know how many you did, but it's probably in the like 50 to 70 ballpark of this set.
Because I was testing for the World Championship as well.
Yeah. And then I look at and I look at that and I'm like, well, yeah, it's not like we're doing a short amount of drafts. It's not like we're not playing this format. And then, but what keeps you going? What keeps you, even if I'm on the low end, let's say I overestimated. Let's say I did 40 drafts. I know I did more than that, but let's say I did 40. 40 is still a lot of drafts. In order to have a lot of fun, you got to have something that really strikes your interest. And for us, and this isn't going to be true for everyone, of course, build-arounds are a really big part of that, because they are something that lets you craft this deck where the sum of the parts ends up being, the whole ends up being greater than the sum of the parts. Where I think the sets where the pick orders don't really change that much based on what you have are like the weakest of the sets. Like these are the sets that I think like just don't end up being that fun. And I think that when all the build-arounds kind of don't work, or most of them don't work, that just means that once I've drafted the archetypes a couple times each, what else is there? Like what are you doing that's different? One of the reasons March of the Machines, like I had so many drafts of that, is the companions on the bonus sheet.
Yep. Allura's
deck was just its own thing. It wasn't like anything else in the format. And you get this one card, which happened to be a card because of the mechanic that you drew every single game. You would get to play that and have that work. And it was just like so cool. So I look at that stuff and I'm like, yeah, I think that there are some cards you can seed in there. And the build-arounds, it's like some build-arounds, when they unlock an entire archetype themselves, Burning Vengeance was like its own thing in Innistrad, or Spider Spawning, right? There's some legendary build-arounds. Not every set's going to have ones of those caliber, and that's fine. But when you look at that and you're like, yeah, this set has some cards like that, that just goes so long, and just adding extra drafts to kind of your tolerance for the format or your interest level in the format, because you're just like, yeah, sometimes, like imagine the world where the Ashiok's Reaper deck was really good. Sometimes you draft that, and that just feels different than your other black-white or black-green decks, right? Which were where these things were concentrated. It's like at the start of every format, most like a normal format, not any of like the 3-color or monocolor formats or whatever weird stuff's going on, you have effectively like 10 archetypes in general, right? You have the 10 color pairs. And then sometimes there's like a 5-color, maybe that's 11, but then like a couple of them don't work. So you're down to like 7 or 8. And then there's a couple like set specific themes. So like there's 2 different blue-red decks. There's blue-red aggro and blue-red spells, and they play kind of differently. At the end of the day, if a set like this, I guess I haven't counted out exactly, but how many distinct viable archetypes are there in Wilds of Eldraine? It's less than 10.
Yes.
And some formats have like 15.
Right.
Some formats have more, because I count Burning Vengeance as its own deck. Mm-hmm. And when you don't have those build-arounds, like those build-arounds, it's like it's kind of like nesting dolls. Like if one card can make an archetype, you're getting so much room. It's like there's more room on the inside than the outside, like the Doctor Who phone booth or whatever. I think I'm doing that right. I've never watched the show, but I think I look at that kind of stuff, and I'm just like, yeah, there is so much more that you can find here because of these archetypes or these specific cards. And that gives you so much value. That's like the Magic player edge you're looking for. You're like, how can I get extra value? And it's like, right. I think one way to get extra value is to make it so that you seed a pack with these archetypes that really just overperform.
Yeah, and also it gives you something to shoot for. Like late in a
I don't
format.
Mean, by the way, sorry. I don't mean overperform in win rate. I mean overperform in like terms of one card enjoyment. Is giving you a ton of extra content.
Yes, totally. Things to draft. Yeah, I mean, because let's face it, when you draft as much as Luis and I do, you get to the end of the format, and I mean, Yeah, I always want to try to win the draft. But you know what I don't send Luis and Paul in our group chat? Hey, I trophied. You know what I do send them? I drafted this, right? Or I won this crazy game.
The Rakdos Rat aggro deck you trophied with because you just opened well and got a bunch of Torch the Towers.
Right.
What you do send us, though, is you send us the double up the Beanstalk blue-green deck that you got 6 wins with or whatever.
Exactly, right? Because it's like, hey, like I actually did it. And when the build-arounds just aren't there, 2 things happen. 1, those aren't there, so I can't aim for it. But also the slots that they take up just disappear basically out of the packs, which distills down the rest. And then I think you have a particularly potent bad recipe when you combine this with a very fast format. Because I'm also thinking in terms of not just you and I who drafted 50 to 100 times or whatever. But what about if you drafted this format 6 times? So your first 3 or 4, you don't know that this format's super fast. So you're probably going to try a build around or draft a normal mid-range deck or try a color pair that, I like blue-green. Well, good luck with that, right? You're going to get slapped around. And so 3, 4 drafts in, you're going to figure out, okay, never mind about blue-green, never mind about these build arounds. This is a format where 1 drops matter and I got to be really fast. And so then, you do your 3 or 4 extra drafts near the beginning of the thing, having sorted that out, and then you're done. That is not a great experience either, right? Like you've sort of compressed the experience of the person who doesn't play as much as we do, but also people that play as much as we do. We don't really mind if a format's fast or slow, as long as there's wiggle room in there about different things that I can do. Well, this one had neither. That's it's a very tough setup for a set.
Full disclosure, we do like slower formats more than faster formats on average, but a lot of that has to do with how many decision points there are and what sorts of things you can get up to. It's not just, I don't like this format because it's fast.
Right. I'm saying, like, if you gave me a choice, I prefer slow formats, but like once a format comes out, it's just a puzzle to be solved. Like, I don't care that it's fast anymore. It's just, how does it affect the gameplay and stuff like that? Was this a Prince or a Pauper set?
This
is like trending Prince-ish.
I think the uncommons were really strong, which pushes you, I guess, a little bit more towards Prince than Pauper. And there were some really ridiculous rares, but that's true in general. I think.
And the removal could keep up, right?
I think if I had to insert one of those 2, I'd say Pauper. Like, I think the commons could keep up. Like, Candy Grapple and Torch the Tower went a long way. I think if I were to give a more nuanced answer, which is what I'm doing right now, it would be that it was somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. It is. I mean, the default is Pauper, right? They do not want to routinely put out Prince sets. Like, those are usually frustrating because first person to land their big bomb, if there's not appropriate answers for them, usually just wins the game. So this one's creeping in my mind towards Prince, but I agree with you. If I had to choose, it would still be Pauper. What's the winner for the "It's a bad card, but I love it anyway" award?
For me, it's Collector's Vault, which
me too.
Really, I mean, I've had some good experiences with the card, but I can't get up here on the podcast and defend to our listeners that you should put Collector's Vault in your deck. I just can't say that.
It dipped down way too low. It's just too slow. Like that, we could make a category, that is, if Collector's Vault is playable in your format, I probably like it, like personally speaking. What about the "I literally never win with it, but it always seems to beat me" card?
You actually beat me to it, which is Non-Crescendo is a card which I have played against a lot, and I put it in my deck a couple of times, but I never really had like the real, exciting draw with it. And then certainly I've lost to it quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of the classic framework for the type of card that you and I recognize as being a little too situational to be something that we want to routinely put in our deck without like a really good reason.
It's because we don't like drafting the beatdown decks as much as the non-beatdown decks. You can just say it. Like,
whatever,
it's
dude. I've seen you draft hella beatdown decks. What are you talking about? You'll draft anything.
I will when the chips are on the line, and when I'm drafting on Arena because I wanna relax and have a draft after dinner.
Not a lot of non-crescendos.
Not all the time. I'm not gonna go. I would never, rarely lie to the good listeners of.
What was my opponent played this, and now I must win or Quit Magic Forever card. There were actually so many choices between the bad rares and the bonus sheet of just like horrendous cards. But one card that stood out to me was Toadstool Admirer. It kind of showed that like you didn't really get where the format was at. Like, yeah, it's a 1-drop, so you have that going for you. But boy, if you thought it was going to be okay for you to play like a 1/1 with no abilities or a 1/1 that would require you to dump a whole bunch of mana into it to get like a minor effect and you were going to win in this format, you were like sorely mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the Enchanted Tales cards do kind of like fall into this category.
Yeah.
But I guess I would say I'd never had someone play it against me, but Necropotence would be the kind of card I would feel a lot of pressure to beat.
Oh, that's awesome. If somebody plays Necro, do you have to beat them or Quit Magic? That's a great one.
Yeah, I mean, one of my biggest disappointments in this format, honestly, is that I had one deck in the early access event where if I had wheeled Necro, I would have played it, and I didn't wheel it, and it was just a tragedy.
See, like that's a perfect example of like an extreme build around, right? One that would really come up extremely rarely that you would want it, but that's the screenshot draft, right? Like if I draft a Necro deck, I'm sending that to you, and I'll update you about the wins later. But like if I made a deck that could like actually cast and use Necropotence, I'm doing it. What was the biggest groan test, the kind of the overrun type card of the set?
Oh, it's got to be, the Gruff Boys, Gruff Triplets. So we were talking about this a little on the lead up to the show, which is that we don't want to make it so the best card in the set is the groan test. Because like, yes, of course, the best card in the set is that.
Right.
But I think that one of the reasons Gruff Triplets felt like that is when they played it, you went from looking at like a hand of, oh, I think I can beat just about anything to like, oh, God damn it, I'm so screwed. Like, This really sucks.
Yes, that is exactly how it felt. And it did have that groan test vibe. Two cards that were similar were Virtue of Persistence and Virtue of Loyalty. And they had the extra rough part that you would get the adventure part first. So now the writing's on the wall. Right? Somebody kills your creature with Virtue of Persistence adventure, and you're just like, great. Like in some number of turns, I'm going to lose this game very slowly. And when they played Virtue of Loyalty and flashed in the thing, you're like, oh, great. If they have one creature was enough, but if they have two, it's just like over, when they cast the Virtue. And the fact though, of course, these cards are just very good, but the groan part of it is that you have to wait, right? It's like they play Virtue of Loyalty guy on turn 2 and you're just like, great, in 3 turns I'm screwed. But you can't just quit right there.
I mean, to give you a throwback, this is like when someone you suspended a card in Time Spiral, like a really good card, and it was just like, oh man, it's like you see that train coming very slowly, but like you're tied to the tracks being this game, and you know that you're gonna get run over, and it's just like, this sucks.
Yeah, it makes you just want to quit. You had another really good one on here for Groan Test.
Yeah, Fawn's Bane Troll. So I had this experience actually literally in the 100K. It was rough, where like my opponent just casts this card on turn 4. And I'm like, well, I can't kill it. And if I play a creature, they're just going to untap, attack me for 5, then fight it. But if I don't play a creature, what am I doing? I'm just getting attacked for 5. All right, I guess I'll play my 4-drop and just have it die. Like, really miserable gameplay experience.
Really rough. Yeah, that card was great. What was the most frustrating, quote, bad card to lose to, or maybe a card that you won't miss playing against?
So I have 2. One is Asinine Antics, which ended up that mythic that makes all your creatures into 1/1s. They curses all your creatures.
Yeah.
Because it's not a very good card, but I had someone blow me out with it once, and it was just like, oh man, that like getting blown out by a bad card like kind of sucks.
Yeah.
The other is Ginger Brute, which I don't think is actually a bad card. It's a situational one. You can't run it in every deck. But when Ginger Brute is beating you, especially when it's one that doesn't really have a lot of enhancements, when you're just at like 9 and you're getting attacked by a Ginger Brute out of Redwood, and you're just like, oh, okay, I'm at 8 now. Play something else. And it's like, oh, I'm at 7. And it's just like you see it's just ticking away. It's just a little, like the little dude just running at you.
You can see him running towards you. Yeah. The funny part is that it's like, It feels almost disrespectful to lose to a 1/1 Ginger Brute, but if they put a counter on it, it's like, hey, you got me. You know, it's like 2/2 Ginger Brute is fine, but 1/1, no. This one was actually quite easy for this set. What was the bombiest bomb, the card you hoping to open up pack one, pick one, or in your sealed pool?
Yeah, that was Gruff Triplets.
Definitely.
It was just the best card.
It was the best card by a lot, which is interesting because it's hard to cast it. It's in a decent color, but not the top color.
Yeah. But the fact that it was basically impervious to removal, in fact, removal often made it so you just took 12 instead of taking 9. Like it was actually going backwards, meant that like it went so wide, so it's not like you're getting killed around it. It was tough.
Very much tough. Yeah. Best card for sure. What was the best common for each color? White, Hopeful Vigil. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. I think so.
What about blue? Spell Stutter, Into the Fey Court. What did you like?
I think it's not a really accurate representation of blue to ask what the best common was, because like that was never why you drafted blue. And this is part of why blue was so weak. All its commons were just complete trash. Like, yeah, Spell Stutter is probably the card I wanted most out of the blue commons. But every other color, taking one of those commons early-ish was not like so bad. For blue, if you took a blue common early, it's like you were conceding the draft. Like the reason to be in blue were the uncommons. And what that also means is by the time you were taking blue commons, you actually had a lot more information about your deck. So sometimes, yes, you would want Spell Stutter, but sometimes you want Into the Fake Court, and sometimes you want Johann Stopgap. Like I had a draft where I started with 2 hatching plans, and it's like Johann Stopgap is like a real high priority at that point, right? Yeah. But you do end up discarding a lot of the times when you make that play.
Poor Louise.
Yeah. So blue's best common is not a very useful piece of information, except to tell you that blue was not very good.
Right. Black, Candy Grapple, but you could make an argument for Hopeless Nightmare. I mean, they were right there, 1 and 2. I would still say Candy Grapple was the best common, but it's close.
Yeah, I think I would always take Candy. I would basically have to have a really weird deck before I started taking any Hopeless Nightmares over Candy Grapples.
Yeah. Red, Torch the Tower, not close, and green was also not close with our big boy, the Hamlet Glutton, which, as we mentioned earlier, just ended up being a 5-mana play,
Yeah.
And that's a lot for 5 mana. What was a mythic uncommon for the set? It was actually very clear.
Yeah, Imidane's Recruiter was just the best by so far. Sutcliffe had a really long thread on Twitter about why Imidane's Recruiter was so good. I didn't read it because I've read the card, but it is funny that like
come on, man, he's not even here.
Yeah, but he's gonna hear
it. Yeah, exactly.
It was a good thread, though. I can tell you that confidently because Sutcliffe does good deep dives. This card was just like. It's funny. We were talking with TBS before the show because when we do the show call, we hadn't removed him from the call from the last show, so he just answered when we started the call, and we were like, "Oh, actually, yeah, let's just hang for a bit," because we were just prepping for the show.
Catch up with TBS.
And he asked us if we missed on this card rating wise because he's like, it ended up being like an A+ effectively. I'm like, no, I think we gave it like in the B range, which I don't consider a miss. If we say a card is good and it ends up being great, I don't consider that like a grievous miss. Yes, we would have rated it higher had we known. But Imidane's Recruiter was just the kind of card. How many times did you splash Imidane's Recruiter in a black-green deck?
Yeah, anytime I could.
Multiple times, right? Yeah. Like it's just one Prophetic Prism. I mean, this was a unique format for that because you had a lot of 5-color fixtures. But yeah, the card was just unbelievably off the wall.
Yeah, super, super good. Fit into the format perfect too. And it was in a good color pair, so you could take advantage of both sides. What was the worst card in the set? The biggest blank, the most last picked? I mean, there's so many to choose from the bonus sheet alone. I was thinking maybe Mana Flare. Like, because it's actively good for your opponent rather than just not doing anything for you in many cases.
I think that you could pick an Enchanted Tales card at random and you would probably be right that it was the worst card in the set. Like Karmic Justice, Mana Flare.
Oromancy, Karmic Justice, like you said.
Any of the
Leyline. Yeah.
I think Mana Flare is a good choice because Mana Flare, I think, is one of the few cards in the set where if you cast it, your win percentage goes way down.
Yeah.
Whereas like the Leylines are like, bad, but you're not gonna like it's not gonna actively harm you. They actually are a slight bonus to have in play. Right. Mana Flare might actively be bad. You just cast it and they play on 8 mana worth of plays, and then you're just like maybe you don't get to untap or whatever.
Yeah, and you're the one that's down a card, by the way. So yeah, well, we'll go with that with Mana Flare. All right, here it is. Your specialty. What card was the most begrudgingly playable?
So I think for begrudgingly playable, I have Misleading Motes. The 3 and a blue, put a creature on top spell.
That's nice. It's not a 3/2.
Never happy to have this card in my deck, but was a card that, like, if you needed a way to do something, you could do it. I have another
bad stopgap.
Another one is Fell Horseman.
Yeah,
which that one actually looked like it was going to be decent, and it ended up really not being decent. I would say indecent even. It just didn't really do the thing.
Yeah. What card will you miss drafting?
Hatching Plans, I think, is my favorite card in the set overall. Like, I mean, I have 2 cards which I really liked, but Hatching Plans was really, really fun. I just liked, I mean, the name. It was Hatching Plans. I'm just sitting there like, I'm going to do this thing,
Yeah, perfect name, perfect everything. I really liked Hamlet Glutton, at common, and then I liked Up to Beanstalk too. Like, those are 2 cards that, an early Up the Beanstalk really was fun to try to build towards. And it gave you, like, again, I mean, we were talking about the build arounds and how they missed. The ones that hit, I mean, I'm clinging to those, I'm just like, please. And we both, by the way, picked a build around for that answer. What was the LSV-est card in the Marshall?
I actually think that Collector's Vault is the overall most me card.
Yeah, that's pure
What does Collector's Vault do? Well, you spend a lot of mana. You don't get up on cards. It's break even on cards. Mm-hmm. You do generate treasures, which let you cast your off-color cards.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you spend a lot of mana on a lot of nothing. Yeah, and I really did enjoy that.
Exactly like what you like to do.
Hatching Plan's also not bad.
No, that's true too. I picked a little bit of a different one for me, but I really liked Hollow Scavenger. I like cards that give you multiple permanents, especially in formats like this. I like cards that can adapt themselves to being ahead or being behind. Like, I like flexible cards. And this card had a great threat of activation. It was very difficult to deal with in combat. And on top, because it would just be bigger quite easily. And then also, though, like, if you were behind, you had an extra food or a blocker or whatever. And I liked the gameplay on that. I also like cards that let me do something on turn 1 that's actually relevant. What was my soapboxiest card? I guess you put Hopeless Nightmare here, although it was sort of shoved up onto the soapbox. What card do you still have to read when it's cast against you? I put Apprentice Folly.
Yeah, I would say the sagas like Huntsman's Redemption, Apprentice's Folly, like the sagas are always naturally complicated, and these ones were like especially so.
Yeah. Here's the text on chapters 1 and 2. Choose target non-token creature you control that doesn't have the same name as a token you control. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it isn't legendary, is a reflection in addition to its other types, and has haste. It's like, okay, I get it. But it's like, that's a lot, right? That's just like, there's a lot of like asterisks there that you have to go through. Wait, no, it's not legendary. No, it's a reflection, as if, I'm supposed to remember what that means. Okay, let's do it, Luis. Let's get into the big hitters here. From a design and development aspect, how did this set fare? How were the mechanics? What were some of the wins and the losses? Some of the things that we could talk about here is Bargain, the tapping mechanic, the bonus sheet, some of the lesser supported things like, does 4 power or greater matter? Does 5 mana value matter? The build arounds we talked about, the speed of the format, roles, adventure. What do you want to hit here?
I think we can kind of go through some of the mechanics. Like, I do think Bargain was a win. Bargain was well supported.
Julie agrees, by the way.
Yeah, she's bargaining with the dog next door.
Yeah.
But it was well supported. You got to do the thing, and I think that is very cool. Like, you do like to see that. You'd like to see that the set mechanic works, and I think it's pretty cool. I think that the biggest misses for the set, or like the biggest strike against the set, was that too many of the mechanics didn't work. Like not just mechanics, too many of the things didn't work. So by that I mean the blue-white tap mechanic didn't work. white, black, or white, green, like aura rolls mechanics didn't work. I'm not saying that rolls themselves are just like a failure, because I don't think that that's true. But I think that in general, the mechanics based around those rolls pretty much didn't work. Like,
no, they were enchantment or aura based, and they just didn't do anything.
Yeah. And yeah, you would play the cards that gave rolls, because those cards were kind of priced like to move, as it were, like where you were like, okay, I'm pretty happy doing this thing. But you are not trying to make it so that your roll cards did the thing. And that I think is a disappointment. Like, I think that sucks. And that also means that white green didn't have much of an identity besides, I'm going to attack you. White black was like, if you have good white and black cards, then yeah, you can do some things, but that was about all you were getting out of that.
What about the build around thing? We talked about it already, but how did it affect, what grade would you give it, I guess, or, from design and development standpoint?
I think that the build around grade, or the build arounds, were like, that was among the weakest of all the things going on. It's just like the build arounds didn't work. Like, all these mechanics I just mentioned didn't work. The bonus sheet didn't really work. Like, I don't feel like the Enchanted Tales sheet was a hit.
Is this the biggest bonus sheet miss we've had?
Oh, by so much, yes.
Yeah. I mean, it felt like a negative in the sense that there was opportunity cost there of a sheet of one slot in the booster pack that could have tremendous upside or be interesting or cool. And instead it was almost all ignorable. Yeah.
And it's the sort of thing where, like, any one of these things not working isn't ideal, but having all of them not work is I think just too bad. Like, I think that it ends up being a really kind of, it detracts from the environment. And I really don't like when a lot of the things that you're kind of supposed to do in the set, or you're kind of incentivized to do, or from the surface level, don't actually work, and you don't get to do them. And I think that, like, the 5 cost theme didn't work. So blue-green was bad. Like, I actually remember the literal first draft of WoW I did. I first and second picked Troyan, right? The blue-green uncommon. And, like, that deck did fine because it was, like, the early access event. No one knows what they're doing. And then I was like, oh, this is cool. And then it's just like, oh, this doesn't work. Up the Beanstalk kind of works the way you mentioned, which was a cantrip that you sack to bargain. Sometimes you do an extra card off it. So it's like we have this long list of themes, build-arounds, bonus sheets that just weren't really functional in the way of the set. And, like, that's pretty frustrating, because it's like, well, I want this thing to work. I want to be able to kind of play with the cards that you have put in front of me, and I'm not able to do that.
What about the speed? Take our personal preferences out, and, because we kind of put on two different hats for these, for honestly, for all of our shows, but, for these Sunset shows in particular, where we say what we like, what we would want, but we would not necessarily, if we were in Wizards of the Coast and we were the ones who were making the sets, we would not design them in the way that we like to play them. We would design them in the way that appeals to a broad audience, or, hits different notes and stuff like that. Was the format too fast? Like, if you're just a developer at Wizards, not Luis Scott-Vargas, who might prefer a slower one.
I think it was a little bit faster than you would like, because part of the reason I say some of these things didn't work, it's like because the format was too fast for them. Like,
it just squeezes out the fringe stuff.
And so one of the things that we look at when we're talking about this is how many of the things that didn't work were, like, really big. It's like, well, the bonus sheet not working, that's pretty big. I would say that's not great. The tapping mechanic working, yeah, that's pretty big. That's a whole color pairs thing. Same with the white-green or white-black stuff, or the blue-green stuff for that matter, right? Some of the things, like certain specific individual build-arounds not working, that's fine. You're not, like, it's not the end of the world. But I would say that blue kind of missed. Like, yes, there's some confusion over how good blue is, exactly all that. I would say blue missed. I think that's, like, a reasonable thing to say. And given that, like, okay, we're talking a lot of stuff that missed here, and that's cutting off a lot of the potential space to play games. Yeah. And how many cards in this whole ecosystem, right, from the set plus the Enchanted Tales bonus sheet, would you say basically weren't functional, didn't work? Like,
15% or something? I don't know.
maybe more. I don't know.
Maybe 20. Like yeah, it felt like, I mean, it felt like the biggest number that we've had, the biggest percent.
And as a result, you just end up in a spot where a lot of the game pieces you're presented with are not ones you should be putting in your deck or taking in a draft. And it's just, that's a lot less fun.
Yeah. I mean, I think that they face a fundamental issue with the speed of the format stuff, because power creep is real. We all know it. Everybody who's been playing Magic, looks at, in fact, we've got a preview card coming up for the next set that we'll talk about when we're done here. But it's a good example of, sort of where cards are at these days. I'm not shocked to see it or anything, but if you showed this to me in 2010, I would have been like, holy, like what happened here? Like this card's absolute, like I would have just been looking for the downside and there just isn't one, right? And admittedly, spoiler alert, but it's a mythic rare dragon. Like they should be pushing the boundaries on that. But, to back it up to the more normal sphere, we've seen the 1-drops become clearly a more important part of limited design. And that has effectively forced the formats to be a little faster and a little faster than they had been traditionally on average, which is also fine. I think the gameplay of those can be totally fine. But it does put pressure, significant pressure on much of the design space that they could use to do interesting, fun things like most of the stuff that missed here. Yeah. Right. And that is a cost that you pay when your game speeds up this much. You don't have any room for cute stuff because people will always be weighted towards the thing that wins. Yes, there are many Johnnies out there. There are many people out there that are willing to give up some game equity, win equity to do something more fun, interesting, self-expressive, whatever. But that has a line. I mean, if you're just like, look at this cool thing I made and it's impossible to win a game with it, it's not really viable. And so to me, they really do have to sit down and say, if these cards keep getting better and better, which fundamentally pushes the format a little faster and a little faster, if we keep prioritizing 1-drops and lower cards and making those part of the ecosystem, then that is also going to push things a little faster. And what do we give up with that? What are we not able to put in this set? What are we not able to actually really support? Sure, we can print the cards and put them in the set, but I mean, if people just get trounced playing them, then did you really put them in the set? Did they really matter? And I would be, that seems like a very difficult problem to me because you can't just pump the brakes on the power level of the cards. Like if you came out with M10 level cards today, people would be like, this is boring. These cards don't do anything. I'm used to tons of text and they flip over and they have all this extra thing and every card is 2 cards and every card has an ETB. And that's kind of the bar that we're at. I like it. I mean, it's more interesting. It's more fun when the cards are like that, but there's definitely a cost to it. And I think this is another set that shows us that cost, which is that build arounds and slower, interesting, weirder strategies suffer. I
mean, you're describing power creep, which is an endemic problem with games. Well, games that kind of aren't standalones, like, when you have The Last of Us and then you release The Last of Us 2, they don't really connect. It doesn't matter if the guns are better or worse in The Last of Us 2 than The Last of Us 1. But when you're talking a game like Magic or Hearthstone or anything where you're putting in new kind of content, then power creep is a significant challenge because it's like, well, how do you make it so the new cards can compete with the old cards and aren't overshadowed by them? But if you always make the new cards better than the old cards, then you have this problem. And yeah, that is real. So I think that there's a couple ways around it. One is one that Magic utilizes well, which is rotation. Cards rotate. And like Standard, for example, it's like not every set has to be better than the previous one because some of the sets leave and now new things get to be the good stuff or get to have some good play. Another thing you can do is synergies where if every card is like Shieldred straight up like, the Apocalypse, 4 mana, 4/5, Death Touch, drains you, gains me life. That card is good just if you cast it. Putting it on the board is what you have to do with that card. You don't have to do anything else. In fact, most formats, you're not even comboing anything. In Cube, yes, you cast Time Twister. That's your combo. But what percent of times does someone cast Shieldred and just have it kind of carry its weight on just being Shieldred? And of course, that's almost every time. But what if there's cards that are good if you do the right things? Like think of the mono blue deck that Autumn won the Pro Tour with. The Curiosities and 1/1 flyers and cheap counterspells. Like those cards combined well to be good, but you couldn't just put any of those cards in a different deck. I top-aided that Pro Tour with a blue-red Phoenix deck that was playing almost none of the same cards.
Right.
Because those cards didn't work in their deck, much like my cards wouldn't work, their cards wouldn't work in my deck and mine wouldn't work in theirs, even if we had significant overlap in color. So synergy can lead to things where it's like, oh, well, this card's good if you play these other cards, but it's not like you can make a deck of all just good cards. Though Standard frequently does end up in a spot where you just make a deck of all good cards. And for Limited, one of the things that's nice is that a new format doesn't have to compete with the old format. The cards in Wilds of Eldraine, they don't care what was in March of the Machine. That doesn't affect them. So you end up in a spot where you're able to do a pretty good job of
just cleaning that slate every time.
Of just resetting and you can have a different level of cards that are good. But at the end of the day, you are right that if a card is too bad, it's going to lessen its play opportunities. Not every card has to be great, and not every game of Magic is highly competitive. A lot of the way these cards are used are, in fact, in like Commander, where card's power level is not really the only thing going on, right? There's a lot going on that you want to play with. And in Limited, you can have cards be at different ranges of power level and still see different amounts of play and still achieve their goals. Not everything has to be the best thing going on. But if something is just way too bad to really see play in Limited, it's kind of not part of Limited. Like if you took one of the cards that's good, let's say Imidane's Recruiter, right? What if it just cost twice as much on both sides? Obviously, that card would be terrible. No one would ever really put it in their deck. I say no one, but obviously enough people play someone would. But you're kind of just removing that card from Limited. That said, it doesn't have to be as good as it is. If you added 1 mana to each side or 1 mana to one of the sides, maybe you'd have a more reasonable card. But if you cost it such that no one's going to play it, then what are you doing with that slot? What is that slot doing for you?
Right. Yeah. I think it shows you, at least me, some of the sets that I've liked the most have been 3-color based sets where they clearly give you and their cards a little bit of room to develop, right? Tap lands, tri lands, mana fixing, and they don't put the emphasis on the cheaper cards, at least them being aggressive or affecting the board directly. And, that seems to me the bastion now, because there is the place where you can do cool stuff, weird stuff, get away with the build around some difficult to cast thing. If I'm casting a card that costs Wooburg or something like that, and you can actually do it sometimes, that to me is the interesting design space. But in a normal 2-color set, it feels like it's been a while since we've had that. And I think they're going to have to take a look at the average speed of the format and if it's where they actually want it to be. Because personal preference aside, I do think that these faster formats by necessity squeeze out slower, more interesting strategies. And that might be something that you want every once in a while for people that really like to just, cast 1-drops and combat tricks and just get in there. But I would do it rarely if I were them, because most of the time a format will have an aggressive deck that can kind of satisfy that niche, but you can still be in the mid-range and do other stuff as well. I'm not even advocating that the format should be slow. It's just, you need at least mid-rangey average if you're going to allow a little bit of wiggle room for some of these more obscure cards to breathe and give people a chance to play.
It's always good to have a range. I think you wouldn't want every format to be the same speed. It's good to have some are slower, some are faster.
Agreed.
And you can have fast formats where there's plenty of cool stuff going on, interesting decisions. It just, there are different challenges, right? So
right. What grade would you give this thing? Or actually, I guess we have what did this format teach you? Did it make you better at Limited? I mean, it doesn't sound nice, but I mean, it just taught me when you miss on major themes and basically every build around, that the set suffers. Because the way I see this is I kind of view the era that we're in as kind of the spreadsheet era for Limited, meaning that the similarities between sets are much more overlapping than the differences. You can see that there are checkbox cards that they put into basically every set, right? Hey, look, there's the expensive, slow black removal spell. There's the cheap, efficient black removal spell. There's the 1 mana, usually super cheap, kill small things, red removal spell. There's the 4 mana one that kills big things, right? Hey, look, there's the 2-drop 2/2 that has the mechanic of the thing in it. And then you expand that out to this like big matrix. And I'm sure there's empty slots that they can put whatever they want in, but you can see them checkboxing a lot of the stuff that goes in. And to me, that's a double-edged sword. I think overall, it's vastly positive. I think it's the way that you should do it. It means that you don't have these horrible misses where like the set just doesn't even function, right? You can't draft it, or it's just like so bad that people make it so that they just don't want to play anymore. And it gives you a safety net because if you check enough of these boxes that there's a framework of playability here that, by the way, this set met. Like, this was a totally playable draft set, right? It happens to be my least favorite in a really long time. Both, I think, objectively, I think it was one of the worst sets, but also personally, I just like I stopped playing it basically once I could, and I didn't go back, and I haven't done that in forever. So that's kind of a double whammy for me, because there's definitely been sets that didn't really hit for me, but that I recognized were good. But this one was, I think, not good and didn't hit for me as well. And, for me, this exposes the detail that you need to put in if you're going to do a set like a 2-color set in the spreadsheet era. You need to take care of the build arounds. You need to monitor the speed of the format. And I can't imagine that they would be happy with this being the second fastest format in recent memory, and also had all these cool design space and build arounds and stuff that just get left to the side as a result of it. If this was meant to be such a fast set, then all of those should have been filled in with interesting combat decisions or interesting mechanics that cared about being on board, not with stuff that you just never really got to try. So the thing that it taught me was that, yes, having the spreadsheet era in effect, as I'm calling it, is a good thing overall, but you can't skip the details. Like these, if you miss on too many, you get a set like this that just kind of doesn't resonate.
Yeah. And I think that, at the end of the day, the set wasn't a disaster, but it was forgettable. And I really haven't seen many people say, I mean, this is all anecdotal, I guess. I just haven't seen many people say, like, wow, I really love this set.
No, I haven't either.
There just wasn't much like that,
No. And I mean, as I said, the set's playable, right? Like they still have their framework in place, and I still did. They got their money's worth out of me. It wasn't like I was like, I'm off it, this thing sucks, and I just left. But once the Vintage Cube went up, I went to it. And then the Vintage Cube ended. And normally my routine would be to go back to whatever the set was, kind of revisit it and draft it until whatever came out next. And I didn't do that this time. I also want to mention that I think that this type of thing they are in some ways a victim of their own success. If you look at how well the sets have been for Limited over the past 3 years, 4 years, like they have very few misses, a lot of home runs, and like the average set is like a double or a triple. I mean, they're very, very good. We routinely give B's and A's, and in this case, I'm not. I'm giving this a C- because it was playable. I did play 70 drafts or whatever, so it's hard to say like it's a D or an F, but this is the highest grade that I would want to give it because it missed on basically everything else for me. Yeah. What do you want to give it?
I'd give it a C- as well.
Okay. It's a tough one. What was your favorite card of the format?
End of the day, I think Hatching Plans was the card I had the most fun with.
That's the one I think about for you for sure. You latched onto it early. It ended up being legitimately, a good build around, not just a Luis Scott-Vargas early build around. My favorite one was Extraordinary Journey, which is a rare, so I didn't get to play with it too much. But that card was sweet. Like that's the type of card that I would love to see, maybe in a cube, maybe not Vintage Cube. It's a little slow for that, but maybe in a Legacy Cube or something like that. Exiling stuff and then getting paid back when they play it. It's kind of insidious, it sets them back and then it loads you up with cards. And I really like that. And it was appropriately mana intensive, but still pretty sweet. Okay, so that's it for our Wilds of Eldraine Sunset show. But we have one more thing to talk about, which is our preview card for what is it called? Something that lost whatever of Ixalan?
Lost Caverns of Ixalan.
Caverns of Ixalan. And our preview card is absurd. It is an absolute joke. It's called Bone Horde.
Might be the best card in the set.
Maybe so. I mean, it's the best preview card we've ever gotten, right? I mean, this is like ludicrous. Bone Horde Dracosaur is 3 red for a 5/5 dinosaur dragon. So I love dinosaurs, and of course dragons are sweet. So this one is just like, I'm in. It's a mythic rare 5/5 flying first strike. And it says at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. And you will note that it's play, not cast. That does count lands. If you exiled a land card this way, you get a 3/1 red dinosaur creature token. Like, you just get one. If you exiled a non-land card this way, you get a treasure token. That's it. Like, there's no downside. It doesn't bite you. It doesn't get tapped. It doesn't do damage to you. It's just like, cast it and say, hold, and that you get to your upkeep and you can't lose.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Like, I mean, this is look, the downside, if you will, of this card is that if you cast it, they can just kill it, and then you get nothing back, right? Like that's
there's no ETB effect here,
right? But you get to next turn effectively draw 3 cards.
Yeah, and add to the board.
I guess if you exile 2 of the same type, you only get 1. But if you go land, non-land, you get a treasure and a 3/1, and then you get to cast them.
And then you can play the land and cast a spell. You still get a draw step, by the way. So yeah, Bone Horde Dracosaur, man, that's our guy. Like, this is we have arrived, Luis. We got a freaking mythic rare 5/5 dragon for our preview card. Like, there's really nowhere to go in Magic from here, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, we peaked.
Is this better or worse than winning the PT? Just be honest.
Well, it's worse, but yeah,
it's a little worse. Okay,
still pretty cool though.
Okay, well, I'm going to hang on to it because I didn't win a PT, so this is what I got: the Bone Horde Dracosaur. Anyway, so we're going to do the set review once we can. We're kind of working on scheduling for it once we figure out exactly when the cards will be up. I've got a little bit of a trip coming up on the weekend, but we're going to work our way around it the best we can and try to get that up to you just as soon as we possibly can. But yeah, I got a little foreshadowing on Bone Horde Dracosaur. It's going to get an A+. I'll tell you that one.
What a card.
So there's your rare and mythic rare review in the books. Okay, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for hanging out with us as always. If you want to find us on social media, I am Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. And if you'd like to become a patron, a supporter of ours, they call them members now. You can go to patreon.com/limited resources. Thank you so much again for hanging out, and we'll see you next week.
So I consider myself pretty good at draft. I would say. I mean, if I can't say that,
go tier,
right?
Pretty good.
And I think that overall, like, I have a good understanding of it. I've played a lot of drafts. I've put in my dues. I would not consider myself very good at fantasy football draft. And let me tell you some of the moves I've made here.
You're in a fantasy football team? You have one?
I league with all the Denver folks plus.
Oh my God! Jay's like huge into fantasy. Like, he's going to listen to this and probably judge you harshly.
I don't know if he'll judge me. I don't know. Maybe I've made some good moves. So, so one of the things that I did was I didn't have a legal team at the end of the draft because I didn't draft. I drafted too many quarterbacks and not enough like wide receivers.
Okay.
Luckily, my teammates helped me fix that. Or not my teammates, my friends who were in the draft. Mm-hmm. And then another thing that I ended up doing was I ended up in a spot where I was told, hey, you should, first of all, I fielded a team with multiple players who were either on a buys or injured one week and lost badly. And then what happened was I was told, okay, you got to take Keenan Allen, put him on your bench because he's got a bye this week, or was injured. I don't remember. And then I did, and BK was like, "What are you doing? You dropped Keenan Allen." I'm like, Yeah, I was told that I wasn't supposed to run him this week.
No.
They're like, no, you're supposed to put him on the bench. I'm like, oh, I don't know how to do that. I thought dropping players. And they're like, is that why you dropped this other player last week? Like, I apparently was just dropping players instead of moving them to my bench.
Like booting them off of your team onto waivers, dropping?
Yeah.
Like
Yes. And then Matt Nass picked up Keenan Allen and was told,
oh, no. They did you dirty?
Well, and then it was told by the commissioner, I don't know why BK is the commissioner. It's very odd.
Wow. Power hungry BK is the commissioner, huh?
Yeah. And then it was told, no, you gotta give him back to Luis. And so he does. And then me and Matt play. And then the guy he picked up instead outperformed him badly.
So I take it you're not winning in this league at the moment.
Oh no. No, I'm very much not.
All right. So we finally found something that you're not good at.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
That's a relief.